Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Katerina Pavlakis, the intuitive cook, and my guest at home today is Annette Anthony. Annette is the author of Always Enough, a Global Food Memoir, a cookbook that takes the reader on her journeys from Philadelphia into the world across 3 continents. Her memoir showcases how food has been a bridge builder as she navigated living and raising a family abroad, and has been described as an adventure at the crossroads of cultures. I'm really excited that Annette is joining me today to chat all about cooking across cultures, curiosity for new flavors, and connecting through food. Welcome, Annette.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. I enjoyed looking at your website and seeing some of your former podcasts. So congratulations, because you're making quite a mark quite soon. It's a new podcast, essentially.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have you, Annette. I've been really excited ever since Sojourner got in touch about your book. And I thought, oh gosh, that is the kind of person I want to talk to, with so many different food memories and food experiences.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about food memories, but can you share a really early memory, maybe the earliest memory you have of food and cooking and eating?
Yeah, good question. My earliest food memories go to my grandparents' home, which is pretty much where my life started, because my parents, were young, married, school, working, and my grandparents largely took care of me. So it was really a big family table because we were several generations living together. And I thought about a food memory that's not in my book. So to leave something for the book as well. And my grandmother, my father's mother, she loved making something called succotash. It's kind of a seasonal dish when a certain type of lima bean was harvested, and it was a stew made with tomato, corn, and these beans. So I remember her getting those beans, opening them, and that was something I could help with, even as a little girl, getting the beans out. Generally, children weren't in the kitchen that much. It was a hot, dangerous place. But I could do cold things. So yeah, that's probably actually one of my earliest. And then, of course, fishing with my grandfather. My grandfather would take me fishing, and my book talks quite a bit about that. Cooking that fish, bringing that fish home to my grandmother. Yeah.
So that makes, food a lot more real, isn't it, than buying a package of a fish fillet, say, from a supermarket shelf, isn't it?
Yeah.
In those times, there was more of a connection. Mm-hmm. There was a passage in your book where you described when you got to Paris and realized that cooking was quite a physical thing.
It can be, very hands-on, tactile. So I had I would say, good fortune of living above a butcher when I first moved to Paris. So you can imagine, that was quite, for me, coming from the US and supermarkets, that was quite a spectacle to behold. The butcher, real butcher shop. And this butcher particularly specialized in beef. So he had some really big carcasses, big storage spaces. But every part of meats you could imagine. So it was never you just go pick up a steak. No, he was going to cut it off, part of the animal that the meat you want came from. He kept everything nicely in its fats. And that was really interesting, seeing him work and kind of learning about meat through having a butcher as a neighbor.
And I guess you learned about cooking a lot of different cuts and not just the standard.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I wouldn't say I had a favorite cut or one in particular, but things like the importance of the marbling and the fat content, kind of what you're looking for and what you're going to prepare, and what needs to be slow cooked, breaking down mussels, what breaks it down, what tenderizes. So it's just working again with what was kind of seasonal coming in. You live in Wales, is that correct? So I'm sure you know the lamb and all the wonderful ways to prepare the lamb and the seasonality. I've tried everything probably, except tongue. And I've probably tried tongue as well, actually, when I think about it, but not prepared. I don't prepare.
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is this sort of buzzword at the moment. And it does occur to me that using everything in the best possible way is a very sustainable way of eating.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's about plants or animals, whether you're using all parts of a plant, like in Greece, for example, where I'm from and where I'm sitting at right now, beetroot leaves.
Yeah.
For example, are always used as a green, just like spinach or chard. Yeah. It wouldn't occur to anybody to throw those away.
No, exactly. Exactly. They're good.
Do you remember another big contrast when you moved to Paris from the States that stood out to you of the different food culture or eating culture?
Oh, gosh. I mean, the eating culture and the food culture decades ago, not today. The world, so many places are becoming more similar. But a few decades ago, there were still some quite big differences. Obviously, the outdoor market, not having the same type of grocery stores to get all of your shopping needs. That was a big change for me. I really, got into the habit of going to the weekly outdoor market and learning about the seasons. And that took me back to when I was younger in the US before the advent of supermarkets. My grandparents grew up having seasonal food, and I still have a memory of that. And that was nice to rediscover in France. I think for me, I learned a little bit more about animal husbandry. This was living above a butcher and having a good relationship with him and learning more about, generally eating at friends' homes, having people combine foods in different ways with that seasonality, the seasonal fruits, getting different types of plums and how people stew those and use those with meats. It was, the sweet and savory, a different take on sweet and savory. I enjoyed every minute of eating my way, at least for the first year. I did have to take a break from pain au chocolat at some point. Too much discovery of the French pastry shops, but certainly enjoyable.
And, as you're describing, your neighbor was a butcher and you would go to the market in the neighborhood and all that. And that also kind of is fostering like community connection.
Oh, absolutely.
And you talk a lot about that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a real rapport and relationship with all of the local merchants. There was a cheesemonger, the fruit person, the butcher, the baker. Obviously, there were rival bakers in the neighborhood. There was a real life and community, and everyone kind of knew what was going on. And it was interesting. It was fun. And a different way of approaching food. So shopping every day, for example. Whereas I tend to shop now once a week as well. I try to go to the market and get enough for the week. But when I first moved overseas from the US, people still were shopping every morning if they could, or picking up things after work on their lunch hour. There was a little more freshness, I think, to the food.
And maybe also a little bit more, I don't know, cooking whatever was good that day or whatever you were craving that day, and sort of less planning. Would you say that was the case?
Yeah, probably. I, on the other hand, am a big planner, Katerina. That's just a personal quirk. So I kind of do like to plan meals the week, think about what I'm going to do so that I don't have to do too much effort. But if I see something unexpected that looked good, I'll take it and do something with it.
So do you remember learning to cook? Is there a moment that, maybe there was a light bulb moment or a lesson or just watching someone?
Yeah. Learning to cook and a light bulb moment, I have to say, and I give real homage to my family table that I grew up with. But I didn't cook so much in the US. It was really when I moved to France. And a friend recommended a cookbook. He said, Annette, really, if you want to learn about French food and cooking and you're enjoying this, get this cookbook, which I talk about in my book as well. And I think it's good for everyone who wants to spend some time in the kitchen to find something that resonates with them, something that they can consider their kitchen tome and what's going to help them learn about every aspect of preparing food, from the sauces to the cuts to using the full repertoire that you get in the kitchen. So that light bulb moment for me was, getting a book that I really said, I'm going to use this to learn. This is going to be my foundation. So I feel I'm a bit self-taught, and then I would try to replicate things I liked that I had outside of the home.
So as you said, you're a planner. Would you say you kind of methodically worked yourself through the book?
I did. Actually, I set aside some time. I was writing actually working on a different writing project. One of the lecturers suggested that I think about writing food stories. He said, you've got these evocative stories around food. Have you thought about writing a cookbook? Then other people got on board, encouraged me, and voila. I ended up with a book.
And you have some stories in your book, but also a lot of recipes.
Yeah.
How did you collect these recipes? Because obviously they are from all sorts of very different places.
The book is really about how food made me feel across my adventures and journey, I would say. So hopefully it's the feelings that I bring out in the recipes as well, because some of the stories are woven into the recipes, as you know. Collecting the recipes was actually part of the planning process. With family life, I would have a weekly menu where everyone give a contribution, what they felt like eating or didn't eat. So I actually started collecting recipes quite early. And I think the recipes in the book are the ones, again, that are associated with strong feeling and the feelings that I evoke in the stories. If I traveled somewhere, had something that I enjoyed, I would try to make it when I went home or get as close as possible to the flavor. As you know from the book as well, I spent quite a few years living in West Africa. Moving back to Europe at the time I did, it was not as easy as it is today to find a lot of the ingredients that were used there. So I put a lot of effort into trying to replicate some of those recipes that we really enjoyed in West Africa. It was just taking a bit of the places I love with the family when we moved, when we changed. And having something to, I think, recall good memories as well and enjoy good taste, good food.
And you said, you would try to replicate as close as possible. So would you actually have a recipe? Would you write things down and then try to replicate it? Or would you just improvise on the flavors?
Yeah, interesting. Probably a bit of both. So the challenge of the book for me was that I had to write the recipes down in greater specificity. Every time I make a recipe, the same recipe, there's a variation, right? You can do the same recipe 1,000 times and you always tweak. So as more variety of vegetables became available on the market, I could get more authentic or closer to the flavors that I was trying to mimic. For example, I don't know why, but recently my local market has started having sorrel, which is a kind of a lemony, tangy, green, spinach-like vegetable, but quite distinct. It's not spinach, but this herb actually was used quite a bit in the cooking in West Africa. I don't know why sorrel has appeared in my local market, but I'm quite excited about it. And I've been buying it and steaming it and freezing it. So I have it to pull out and use it in some recipes. Yeah, I try to stay as authentic as I can. So as I say, I'm not a fan of fusion that much, but I do try to get to an authentic taste rather than make something new.
And now that you mentioned fusion, I mean, as someone who has lived in so many different places, how do all these influences and inspiration come together? Do they not somehow?
They do.
Fuse?
Yeah, you're right. I think I like the word blend better than fuse.
Yes.
Maybe it's a culinary term, the idea of blending flavors, blending ingredients. So, obviously there is a blend. When I got to England, that's when I really started blending a lot of different flavors and creating a few twists on some of the recipes I'd learned in Europe and living in West Africa, traveling in Asia. So there's a blend for sure. But I won't blend too much. I'll substitute where I need to.
Okay.
You do have to rely on your intuition. And I know that really resonated with me. The title of your podcast and your ethos around making whatever you have available work and using your intuition to guide you with that. So I call it making do. And I think that's really critical, and it's confidence building. It's funny. One of the stories in my book as well, I talk about making a lamb dish, and the recipe actually called for one ingredient in a dried form. And then later in the recipe, it called for the same ingredient, but in a fresh form. And that's where your intuition comes in. I knew in reading the recipe, there was something that had been kind of lost in translation, because it was a translation actually from another language. And, I did rely on my intuition in that sense to decide whether I was going to use powdered or fresh.
So let's dive back into your travels. We talked about your time in Paris. Then you moved to West Africa, to the Ivory Coast. Yeah. So how was that transition in terms of eating and cooking?
Oh my gosh. It was just a wonderful discovery. And it was a real surprise. I'm glad I had that kind of preparation of going through France so I could get some foundations, because again, moving to West Africa, food was even more organic and closer to the source. So you really, again, had to be a little more comfortable with getting things in their natural state and, cleaning them, cutting them down and using them. And the culinary scene in Ivory Coast and in other countries I've visited throughout Africa is just amazing. The techniques to prepare meat, the techniques to season meat, really, I think that was something I really discovered living in West Africa. Obviously, there are a lot of different ingredients. The use of sea life is just out of this world, from, dried to smoked types of fish and sea life, which I'd never seen before or used before in cooking. From giant snails to teeny, teeny, tiny fish, and, and how they're used sometimes in powder form, sometimes just to add a little umami, some interesting depth of flavor to dishes. It was wonderful, wonderful experience.
So in France, you had that book that you worked through to learn more about French cooking. So how did you learn in West Africa?
That gave me the confidence to handle food and get into it. But, I learned through eating at people's homes, talking to in-laws, family, just asking people questions. Essentially, that was it. I ate my way again through a few countries in the continent. So, it's really just a curiosity of asking questions. How's this made?
And I guess the openness to try new flavors and new things and really make the most out of that adventure, because, there are adventurous eaters and not so adventurous eaters.
Yeah. I was slightly adventurous. I wasn't the most adventurous, but I was pretty adventurous in trying things. And, even if I wasn't going to try it, I would certainly ask about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
Curiosity,
absolutely.
Right?
No, absolutely.
And now that you've sort of settled in yet another country in London, from all these travels, how does your everyday cooking look now? Like, what are you cooking today?
Well, my everyday cooking is still, every Saturday, I try to go to the farmer's market, see what's new, what I need, and kind of let that lead the week a little bit. So I got a cauliflower. And one thing I'm really exploring now is gram flour. And actually what I'm going to make today or this evening is a type of vegetarian curry with cauliflower and a few other things. And I'm going to bake it in a gram paste. So in a gram dough, I'll bake it in that. after it's cooked down. So I'll have like a savory graham bread with vegetables in it. Yeah, I'm trying to eat more vegetables in general and also explore other types of starch, if you like, carbohydrates. So that's why I'm exploring a bit now with some graham flour. The other thing I've been really enjoying recently is artichoke bottom, which I don't use a lot, but I want to try, doing things with this. So I've been doing some like warm salady type things with artichoke bottoms and eating those a little more.
That sounds good. There is this sort of stew type dish that is quite popular in Greece with artichoke bottoms, potatoes, and sometimes green peas, and that special Greek sauce where you have like a stew type or a soup and you mix egg and lemon. And then you slowly put that into your hot liquid and it turns into this sort of white, creamy, tangy sauce that is used in a lot of dishes. Like in fish soup very often, there is a pork and celery dish that is classic with that, but also with artichoke bottom.
I'll have to look that up.
It's called avro lemon.
Yeah.
And it basically means egg and lemon.
Yeah. Delicious.
So,
I remember that from my trip to Greece. It's delicious. Yeah. Delicious. So artichoke bottoms and peas in that soup base and potatoes in that soup base. That sounds amazing. You also mentioned pork and celery. Now that's interesting. Yeah. How does that work? Because I always am trying to use celery.
Right. That is another kind of stew type dish where you stew the pork with celery. You could use a green celery or a celeriac or both of them. It's just goes very well. And it's often finished with that egg and lemon sauce. So then you've got that lemon sort of tang to that as well, which works nice because it cuts a bit through the sweetness of the pork. And I think working with contrasts always makes things tastier.
Yeah. I have to try that.
And what would you say? Can you sort of pick one favorite thing to eat or a few, if you must?
A favorite thing to eat. One thing which I like, which is in my book as well, is I love okra chips. And I use them in quite a few things. They're just nice to garnish things. And they're also a great snack. They're just kind of crunchy, a bit like potato chips, but not. And lemons and something that I really enjoy. I would think no matter if I find okra, I'm making some okra chips.
And how do you make them? Because okra is one of the very few things I don't like because of the texture. Yeah. But if you can get them crunchy, well, that is a complete different thing.
Yeah. Well, the recipe's in my book. So I hope you will get to that. It's very simple. I do remove a lot of the gelatinous interior. So you let that run off a little bit, but not that much. Basically, it's in the oven, seasoning it a little bit. It's just something I really enjoy the garnish and to eat directly.
Amazing. Well, there is 160 recipes in your book. I hadn't gotten to that one yet. That's a great one. So maybe you're someone who always cooks, but do you sometimes have days where you don't really feel like cooking? And what do you cook then?
I love leftovers. That's why, my graham flour loaf that I'm going to make tonight, I know that's going to be a couple of days of meal. Then I'll just throw a salad with it if I need to repeat it, or some broth, have a nice broth, and then a little bit of that kind of bread, vegetable bread. Yeah. I'll use leftovers. And I always have something in the freezer. But I'll always cook some, even an egg, scrambled eggs, always a winner with me. Something simple like that.
Eggs are my kind of emergency meal.
Yeah, emergency. I like to keep a few things in the freezer, a few nice little ravioli type dumpling things. You can always throw that in some broth with a few chopped vegetables. You're good to go.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. You also mentioned how you were admiring the simplicity of cooking in France.
Yeah.
So I'm all about simplicity in cooking and simple pleasures in life. And obviously food is the obvious one there. So tell me a bit more about what that means to you.
The simplicity, it's just enjoying what's seasonal, especially things like fruits. I mean, you're in Greece, so you're spoiled I can imagine you having beautiful figs. Just instead of buying jam, it's maybe having a little overripe fruit and putting that on your toast in the morning. I try to keep it as simple as possible, not have too much waste, not throw away things. Just letting whatever the flavor of something is come out as much as possible. Again, blending flavors is important. I like when you talked about having the lemon, egg, and how that balances some of the sweetness. Just looking for those balances in nature. I love the balance that you can get between fruit and meat, for example. I guess lemon is a fruit, citrus fruit. If you have some nice apple, putting that with some duck, yeah.
I really like contrasting flavors, and maybe that's why I also really like Asian cuisine. Like Thai or Vietnamese cooking, they seem to be like really big on the contrast, on the hot and the sweet and the salty all at once.
What's your favorite cuisine?
That's a good question, but I'd probably say Vietnamese.
Interesting.
Because there is a lot of freshness there. In addition to the contrasting sweet, salty and spicy that you also get in Thailand, there's also a lot of kind of fresh herbs and things like that. So yeah, traveling in Vietnam was very tasty.
Yeah.
So you said you collected your recipes and your book is about how food makes you feel. So how does cooking make you feel?
Yeah. Cooking for me has been very therapeutic and calming. I mean, that's really where I get into my rhythm. I get into my zone, is in the kitchen. It's distracting and brings me a moment of calm. And then I enjoy everyone sitting around and enjoying the meal. And so hopefully it's a slow meal because the time you put into preparation, you don't want it over it, in 2 minutes. Also, I feel like, preparing the meal is you're preparing something for your relationships in your life. You're preparing a way to commune. And what feelings will that bring out in the people who are going to be around the table enjoying it? I find food can relax people when they're sitting around eating. It can make them let go a little bit, let their hair down. And if they're enjoying something, they'll start talking more. It's an interesting reaction.
So much about food is about sharing food, isn't it? I think this must be hardwired in us humans, this act of eating together.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And obviously different foods have different effects on people. So I'm not sure we think about that consciously, but what people prepare, it definitely is linked to, like athletes, they eat certain foods for performance. If you're preparing a meal, depending on what the occasion is, you're preparing a meal that's going to fit the needs for that moment. If someone's unwell, you're going to prepare a broth.
Yeah, that famous chicken soup that cures everything.
Yeah, absolutely. With avegomino. How do you pronounce it again? The lemon egg.
Avgo Avgo is the egg and lemoni is
exactly.
So you find cooking relaxing, and I would absolutely agree. I find cooking really relaxing, and especially in the last few months that have been quite stressful in my life, cooking has been the one grounding activity. But then there's quite a lot of people who find cooking really stressful or a chore or both. So what do you think are the best ways to get over that feeling of cooking as a chore? What would you recommend to get into that zone of enjoying it?
I do actually have a chapter where people have to think about how they want to be in the kitchen. I think planning helps get over some of the anxiety around cooking until you build up your confidence to be more intuitive, right? So if you kind of plan and you get it all out of the way, you don't have to think about it too much. And that's what you're going to do this day. That's what we're going to do that day. I think that takes a bit of the stress out of it. Not everyone likes to cook or enjoys it, and that's perfectly fine. But we do all have to nourish ourselves. So, my attitude and how I came to cooking more as well was I was really conscious and aware of what I wanted to put in my body and what I wanted to put in my family's body. So it is really simple to make a tomato sauce. It's also easy to open a jar of tomato sauce. But I hope I also show that it's not complicated to just throw some tomatoes in the oven or in a pan. And it's not that time consuming either. With some planning, you can get over some of the anxiety and, accepting the realities of how you like to work in the kitchen and sticking to those. Finding foods and recipes that suit your temperament and meet your health needs.
What's the best way to do that?
Well, again, for me, it is the planning. It is the planning and thinking about it. There is a consciousness that I like to bring to food. One, so we have less waste. And also that we think about what's good for our environment and our body. Giving it a little thought. That's it.
Yeah. I like thinking about food a lot.
I think about it all the time. But we're talking about people who don't want to think about it.
I don't know. I think my advice is to not take it so seriously, to be a bit more playful, to not be afraid of just try to, add something new, and you're not going to break it.
Yeah.
And that also takes the fear away of doing it wrong.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's no wrong, really. As I said, every time you make a recipe, it comes out different. There's no wrong. You just figure out what you like.
So tell me about the contents of your spice drawer. Obviously, that would reflect all your travels and all your experiences around food. So what's in your spice drawer?
Gosh, a lot. Every time I travel, I try to come home with a spice that I will use. Not that I like necessarily, but something that I think, this is practical. I think I can learn to use this. So my last trip, which was actually to the south of France, I came back with some dried réglisse, which is, I think, licorice, which is not something I've really cooked with a lot before, but I'm going to give it a go because I love licorice. Obviously, a lot of the dried herbs as well, you can use it in drinks or hot drinks. I've got spices from, dozens of spices, different types of cardamom pods, dried garlic, orange flower buds.
And which 3 spices do you use most regularly, would you say?
So the spices that I use regularly are probably in the book. I use something called herbamar, which is because I don't like salt that much. I like salt naturally occurring in food and is appropriate, but I love herbal salt. For example, from southern England, I think it was in Devon, they have a really nice mix of wild garlic and salt. So I use that. From France, I have a really nice mixture of herbs, provincial herbs with sea salt. I also have a celery salt. So I try to get salts that have half of another ingredient to minimize and change the flavor a bit. I love peppers as well. I have lots of different peppercorns. I love a green peppercorn, a rose peppercorn. There's a nice Bristol mixture, a great mixture of French peppercorn. Pepper is really a fascinating spice. It's simple, salt and pepper, but there are huge varieties in salt and pepper.
Salt and pepper. And I love that. Brings us full circle back to simplicity. Yeah. Simplicity is just so useful, like salt and pepper. Thank you, Annette, for talking to me.
It's a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating and delicious conversation.
Thank you very much, Katerina, for having me on and for the questions and the time. It's been fun thinking about food with you.
Thank you. It's been fun talking to you about all your food adventure.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Now I have to make some pork and celery. I'll try that this weekend. That sounds good.